name is Abby Harden with the Edythe J Middle School Veterans Project. Our guest today is
Tom Bensburg.
So where were you born?
I was born in Camden, Arkansas.
In what branch of service did you serve and your rank?
I was in the Army and in the field artillery, and my rank was captain when I got out.
And were you drafted into this or did you enlist?
I enlisted.
Why'd you enlist?
Well, I actually ended up in the Army after graduating from West Point, and I went to West Point, mostly started out with the encouragement of my football coach and my parents. So that's how I got into the service.
That's cool. Did you actually go to war?
I served in Vietnam for almost a year.
Wow. So you obviously served overseas.
Yes.
So did you serve with allies of the United States?
On a very limited basis. When I was in Vietnam, I had some work with Australians, and I also served for a couple of short tours in Germany, and so I spent some time with Germans and French and Canadians at that time.
Oh wow. So what was it like serving during wartime?
It was, sometimes it was boring and sometimes it was scary. But like most people, I just tried to do my job, and it worked out.
Well, that's good. So how did serving change you and your outlook on life?
I'm not sure how to answer that exactly, but I can tell you that even though it was 1974 when I got out of the service, that at times it seems like it was just yesterday. And now I've started volunteering at the Veterans Administration hospitals here in Lexington to sort of connect back to that.
That's cool.
But I'm sure in terms of how I did my work as when I worked in civilian life and you know, how I acted, I'm sure was influenced by my military service.
That's cool. So how did it change your relationship with your family?
Well, of course, the first thing is spend a lot less time with my family. I went to West Point as soon as I graduated from high school, actually within a month after I graduated from high school, and then didn't get much leave time there, and then went right into the Army. So that was the biggest change, is spending a lot less time and moving away. But I don't think it changed anything as far as how we got along or anything like that.
It must really be difficult being away from your family that long.
Well, it is. It was.
So were there times during your service when you were afraid?
Yes. Do you want more details than that?
Yeah, what are some specific times you can remember?
When I was in Vietnam, there was a time when well, there were several times. There would be situations where you know, there would be attacks on the base where I lived. Most of the time I was stationed at what was called Benoit Army Base, which was right next to Benoit Air Force Base. It was a really big Air Force base and a really big Army base. And actually, I'm sure you've heard stories about people in the jungle and the swamps and the rice paddies, like the gentleman that was here earlier talked about. But most of the time I actually was in a fairly safe place and slept on a real bed and had a place to take showers and that kind of thing. But the Viet Cong liked to shoot rockets at the Air Force Base, which was right next to us.
Oh, wow.
And it seemed like whichever way they sat up to shoot at the Air Force Base, the rockets always went right over the little barracks that I stayed in. So I knew my job was to work in what was called the Tactical Operations Center, and so if something happened at night, I had to get up and go to that location. And so I was always up and dressed and on the way to the Tactical Operations Center almost before the rockets hit the Air Force Base because I heard them go over. So those are times when I was frightened. That was one of the times, yes.
That must have been tough.
Well, the good news is since I heard the rocket go over, it wasn't aimed at me.
Yeah, that's true. So what are some good and bad memories you have from the war?
The good memories are the people I met, although strangely enough, I'm not good friends or in contact with most of them. But, you know, everybody was there, or most people were there to do their job and work hard, and so I enjoyed meeting those people and working with those people. You know, the bad experiences, of course, were seeing people get hurt, some people I knew get hurt or killed, and the really bad thing, especially about Vietnam and quite frankly about the even more recent conflicts, you see people getting hurt, people making sacrifices, and frankly not much coming out of it in terms of an advantage to the country. And so you wonder what was the point in sacrificing all the money and lives to do that.
So what lessons did you learn about life?
Well, sometimes you just have to do what needs to be done, even though it might not be fun or it might not be exactly what you want to do. And sometimes when you have to do those things, it's hard, but you have to persevere and do it anyway. And I also think I learned how to get along with people under pressure, and that helped me in my civilian career.
Well, that's good. So where were you stationed?
My first station was at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. As I said, I was in the field artillery, so I went to the field artillery school at Fort Sill. And later on went to Fort Riley, Kansas, in an artillery unit, and then I went to Vietnam. And then came back to Fort Sill for more schooling, and then to Fort Riley, Kansas. And as I mentioned, I was in Germany for a short period of time on what was known as Operation Forger, where they took troops from Fort Riley to Germany for a while for military exercises, and then came back to Fort Riley.
Well, that's cool. What are some specific things you remember from the war?
Helicopters. As you, well, I don't know if you've studied or paid any attention to any films about Vietnam, but that was the age of the helicopters, when the helicopters first came into widespread use, and I was in what's called the 1st Cavalry Division, which was an air cavalry unit, and so there were helicopters around and flying over and landing and taking off all the time. And I spent a lot of time flying in helicopters, so the sound of helicopters, for instance, the medevac helicopters that you see, the life flight helicopters here, that's immediately what I think of is Vietnam.
Oh, wow.
And then the climate, of course, it was hot, and part of the time it was rainy, and part of the time it was dry. And being in a place like Vietnam, where sanitation conditions are different, it doesn't smell like walking down the street in Lexington, Kentucky. So that was one of the very first things that I noticed when I landed in Vietnam.
Yeah. So where were you when the war ended?
When the war ended, I was in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, making Pampers.
Well, that's good. And so our final question, what are some advice you have for our generation?
Well, specifically with respect to veterans and the military, is try to participate more than most generations do in the political process, and make your legislators think hard and long before they commit the military for any purpose. As I said earlier, I think from Vietnam on, I'm not sure that we accomplished anything by the loss of lives and the expenditure of the money. And so I would hope your generation would be harder on your politicians to make them not do that, except when it's really necessary.
Okay. Well, thank you for the interview. It was really nice.
You're welcome.